here to talk about design thinking, the future, fear, possibilities. The future is none other than Banny Banerjee. A warm round of hands.
We switch?
Yes. Welcome, Banny. So,
thank you very much.
Please take the stage. And as you know now, I have this little box here that I'm going to press. It has a strong electrical currency in it. So this might be the last you ever see of me.
Or me.
But we like taking risks here at Good Morning 2020.
So while that's being set up, I just wanted to express my gratitude. I think this is a big honor for me. I've been hearing about this event all year, and I think it's a fantastic thing when this kind of a collection of people in these numbers come together in the same place. And you just like nuclear fusion, there's a lot that can happen right in this room. So before you leave today, I would really urge you to explore some of the idea sex, meaning maybe not the real sex, but the idea sex before you leave the room with someone you have never met before. That was an absolutely fantastic talk, and it leads in beautifully to some principles that I might expose. And so a lot of you are already aware of this term called design thinking. But for those of you who haven't been keeping up with how quickly the design field has been moving, a lot of the native kinds of thinking that has been always a part of the design field, and for that matter, a lot of the things that we do in our everyday lives, has somehow got packaged into a way of being that is now being called design thinking. It has many different components, and it's being used for a very interesting set in a very interesting set of ways. And what's happening is you can see that this kind of thinking is being used to create new ideas, and ideas in the way that Magnus was talking about. It's being used to create completely new experiences that nobody has seen before, or new kinds of systems and new kinds of interventions. But and because this room has so many people from the business side, I'd also like to mention it's being used very heavily by people in positions of leadership to figure out business strategies. And what's being used, this is being used for, is to create blue ocean strategies. So red ocean strategies are where the water's bloody with all these sharks all going for the same piece of food. Blue ocean strategies are where you can step outside the competition and using innovation and these kind of methodologies to create a strategy where, at least for the time being, you have a tremendous advantage. But all these things that I talked about that design thinking currently is fairly heavily being used for is all about this word, transformation. It's about getting to states that don't exist today with a purpose, with a sense of purpose that we leave something changed. And that word is a very condensed word. It unpacks into very many different things, and that's something I'm going to be speaking about. But what design is also being used for, or rather it's being adopted for, is to express a completely new kind of leadership. A lot of the avant-garde leaders today are actually working not in the way that their business schools train them to do, but they're working as chief innovation officers. And a lot of business schools like to believe that they have a monopoly on decision making, but actually decision making itself is being reinvented in very many different ways, and there's a move. The decision making is shifting in very interesting ways, and that's something that I'd like to point out as well. So design walks into very foggy issues, and which don't have very clear-cut boundary conditions. And even when somebody says that there's a very clear boundary condition, the design tends to take a step back and said, actually, it's a whole lot more complex than you're telling me. And then it marches along a very convoluted and interlaced path with very many different modalities going towards a certain kind of radical transformation. And some of the steps involved there's an inquiry and an interrogation which is very, very insightful. It's driven by finding out insights and uncovering insights that are not easy to see. It's the stuff below the tip of the iceberg. It's a very incisive framing of the issue itself. It's problem framing and problem finding. And then you actually use your imagination. You use other cognitive modes to create strategies, to create visions that are then your driving force. And then you generate. You go into extremely generative modes and come up with a very wide set of solutions or options. And then you're very tenacious and you're very persistent in actually getting that to a state of result. Now, this is a very condensed form, and I don't mean to imply that this happens in that order. What really happens is that everything leads to everything else, and you're kind of doing all of it at once, so that each of the issues, each of these modalities is informing the other. But another way of depicting this is this way. If you look at the three sets of words in each of those, what you have is one set of words that has everything to do with attitudinal stance, gumption and optimism, and one's worldview and the kind of opinions one has and the kind of aspiration one has and how incisive one is being. The second one is the vertical set is all verbs. It's very, very action oriented. And it's a very different philosophical stance where you act as you're thinking, and it's very action oriented. And the third column is all outcomes. So this is a field which likes to be very outcome oriented and measures itself by as it's going as to where we are headed. So an example of this, meaning this is from Stanford, a group of 4 students were given a challenge related to a very big foggy issue, big hairy issue, which is of the 130 million babies that are born every year, 4 million of them die in the first few weeks. And the primary reason today is now, it used to be diarrhea, but now it's low birth weight. And low birth weight babies have a real problem maintaining their own temperature. So they're very susceptible to temperature conditions, and that's why they die. And a lot of these deaths take place in a place like India and African countries and so on. So these students went back to India, and they started doing field work there. And contrary to what they thought, these places had the expensive incubators. Now, they were given the challenge that an incubator that cost about $20,000, they were supposed to make it for $200, which is a very, very, tough challenge. When they went there, they found that these hospitals in tiny little towns actually have incubators. Do you see anything wrong with this? Anyone? Empty. Where are the babies, right? Where are the babies who are dying in such numbers? And so they went in search of the places where these babies were dying, and they went to the villages and found that the real problem lay elsewhere. The people in whose families these babies were being born did not have the means to take these babies to the small towns, and they just did not have the money. They had another 2 kids to feed. They were day laborers, and they did not understand what was going on, so the babies would die before they knew what to do about it. And so they completely reframed the problem and said, we do not need a cheaper incubator. What we need is a $25 baby warmer that works without electricity. Completely different. That was not what they were told to do, right? They were told to make a $200 incubator. And that was a very important point in the project. And they came back and they dived into a flurry of action. They brainstormed, they went through huge numbers of concepts, they built over 100 prototypes, and they came up with a really interesting concept. They came up with this insert, a plastic pad with a mix of waxes, such that if you put it in boiling water, it would melt, and the latent heat that would then be used while it was crystallizing back to being solid to keep the baby at the temperature for a long period of time. And this thing, they created a tiny little sleeping bag, so it would go into a sleeping bag, right? Now, just to put it in perspective, there are lots and lots of babies that have died because of low birth weight and other issues, right? The solution of the incubator has been the standard solution for 120 years, right? 120 years, that's been the standard thing. So these 4 students are taking on something that has been convention for quite that long, right? They did something else, which is very, very interesting. I think this is where a lot of, a lot of the value came out. They took their prototype back into the place and found out about whether or not this would work and all the millions of ways in which this would fail with all the stakeholders, for all the little tiny ways in which it would fail in the last mile. Because a good idea is like a helicopter, but you need the fuel, and the fuel is all the little tiny insights that will inform the decisions to avoid the big failures. And so this is what it looks like. It's a little, and by now they've had another 30 prototypes, and I've met people who work in the health, in these circles, and they said, when can we have a few 100,000 of these? We could use it by yesterday, because babies are dying while these guys are getting their act together. And so this is the team, and they were in the final semester. They just continued on. They've started a company called Embrace, absolutely fantastic team. They all had lives in the Silicon Valley. They uprooted themselves, and they're now in Bangalore, and they've grown in size, and they've raised some seed funding. And it's a fantastic team. But this is what really took place. They uncovered really, really good insights that were covered. It was very hard, meaning it was, everybody would have, been able to see them, but nobody did, right? It took them going into the field. They reframed the problem, and they prototyped like crazy. They just went and prototyped everything, but they never lost sight of the real question, which is not how to make a cheaper incubator, but how to keep babies alive. So what comes out of this is that this whole technique is a way of making a really sharp distinction between what is the right thing to do and doing things right, and not mistaking one for the other. Both are very important, but the former is essential to get right before you leap into the end. And what also comes out of this is that they had come up with what's called a paradigm. A paradigm is not a platform. It's not just a solution. It's something that rewrites the rule books. If this works, this is how infant mortality is going to be treated in a large part of the world. And so this is a chart of 100 years of high jump records. And you can see from the curve that there have been 4 styles, and look at how discontinuous the curve is. But what is the takeaway from this is that, first and foremost, something like the Fosbury flop would have looked like utter madness in the days of the scissor kick, right? You're going head first with your back to the bar, with your feet clearing at the end, and you're falling on your head. What kind of sense does that make, right? And now, from the point of view of a Fosbury flop, the scissor kick looks like it's such an asinine thing to do, right? But these guys worked, they spent the entire time trying to get over it by 9 millimeters, right? That's the average amount per year, right? The other thing is that it doesn't, when you change something that radically, you don't change it by saying, let me just improve something by a little bit. It takes let's just imagine what Fosbury must have done. He didn't put the bar up by a little bit. He must have done something like that and said that what would it take to do something absolutely different in a different regime. So paradigm's a very, very important thing, and we should have a quest for how is this a paradigm or not, and a litmus test. Are we thinking of something in a paradigmic one? But again, The real issue is this is a way of asking questions and making decisions. It's a different way of making decisions in a way that really uncovers the really important questions that our conventions and our current memes have obscured. So it's a way of interrogation and building ideas at the same time. So why even question convention? Because after all, you know, we are very, very successful. We can say, we can be very proud that we are, each of us has a long lineage of people who didn't screw up too badly, at least not before they procreated, all the way from the beginning of time. Otherwise we wouldn't exist, right? So we're perfect in some senses. But the reason I think that there's a very important reason to take a departure from tradition is that some big things are happening. We are now at 6.8 billion people, and we added 3 billion since 1970. And if you think about that, it's not that long, right? A lot, meaning some people in the room actually were born and were around in 1970. And some models show that we are 40% above the carrying capacity of the planet, and we will be 11 billion in another 40 years. Now, these things everybody knows about and everybody talks about, etc. And it's something that's not something we bring into our field of view when we do business or when we plan our initiatives. It's just that we've lost that era has gone by, that it can be treated as irrelevant. It directly maps into what we have to do and our survival mode. So here's a 2x2 chart, one of which is on the x-axis is whether you can make the assumptions about the future with confidence, or whether you think that the future will be turbulent or uncertain. And on the other side, on the y-axis, are ways in which you're asking yourself, are you doing things in procedural ways in exactly the way you've been taught to do, or are you reinventing your own way of operating? And what seems to be is that this is clearly the prevalent species, because you know that's what has come as the norm. But the people who are innovative tend to outsmart them because they can see what's coming. They can find a larger bridge between limited resources and aspirational goals, and they have an opportunity to outperform. But this is very interesting. In an uncertain time, a procedural way makes you an endangered species. You're actually under threat. And these are the people who are innovative, they inherit that space. They are the people they become the ecosystem. So some of the modes in which they operate is that this group is capturing value. They are in the business of established ways of capturing value, where this group is trying to create a new kind of value, create value in new ways. And when times get really tough and one moves into turbulent times, this group is a lot of their effort is spent in surviving, whereas these people are creating the rules of the ecosystem. So it makes perfect business sense if we believe that things are turbulent. Now, this is two kinds of states. One with negative feedback loops, where the feedback loops are something that makes it restore. Even if there's a perturbation, things even out and come to nice, happy states. The other one is where the feedback loops are positive, where things become more and more chaotic and more stochastic. And one can argue that a lot of the dominant things that right now control our reality have positive feedback loops, which is very, very scary. And we've seen how many perturbations we've had, right? So we have a choice. Are we just going to manage the present like we've been taught to do in our schools, and in this post-Descartes industrial, post-industrial revolution thinking, which is extremely risk-averse, it's extremely rule-bound. There's decisions about all the decisions we make are dominantly in certain kind of cognitive modes, which are very logical and use deductive and inductive thinking and not other cognitive modes such as abductive and retroductive thinking that I can speak about meaning after the talk? Or are we actually going to put ourselves in the position, like Magnus said, of negotiating with the future? are we going to negotiate with the future and be a part of making some of the rule sets that create the kind of world we would like to see, but also create the kind of feedback loops that are in our continued interest. So one of the things we need to really start thinking about is how do we look at transformations at scale? Because some of the issues that are coming at us, and one can see the Doppler shift in the signals coming at us, are at scale. So how do we think about large and rapid transformations? And rapid transformations have, one can go on about them. It's a very, very complex subject, but simplifying them, you need norm-changing paradigms like I spoke about, but you also need rapid diffusion mechanisms. So if you have that curve that Magnus spoke about, it's simply not enough to come up with a darn good idea that has a linear curve, because that hockey stick is at some point going to cross over. So what we need is actually a big movement to reinvent ourselves. And it seems like a huge big thing, right? Seems like an impossible thing. We are trying to make a world which is not today. But I really believe that there are lots of governing principles we can use to embark on a path, and it's a very exciting path, and one can be very optimistic at the same time as actually building the concerns and into the way we operate. So the reason why the last one is in a different color is because I think that that's where it needs to start. And I think this is a perfect room because all of you are actually either in positions of leadership and are on trajectories to be with a much larger sphere of influence, or you're on the path to becoming leaders. So what is the leader of the future, right? And this is my point of view, which is leaders in the future will be measured by how successfully they're able to drive innovation into their organizations and how successfully they're able to catalyze a win-win ecosystem, which is not just in their precinct. It's an ecosystem I'm talking about, right? And in this game, it's a different game. It's almost like I was playing basketball, and I've gone into this other game, and the rules are different, and I can use the athleticism that was useful there and the hand-eye coordination that was useful there, but this game is called soccer. So are we going to play the tunnel vision game of our own business as if the rest of the externalities is not something I can touch, or are we going to play the ecosystem game? And one of the things about playing the ecosystem game is it's no longer possible to think in terms of one discipline. And the nature of expertise and the nature of, again, decision-making changes. And this is a transdisciplinary system, and this gets used in very many different ways, the term, but there is a difference between multidisciplinary and transdisciplinary. Multidisciplinary is a bunch of people sitting around on the table who are representatives of different fields that their bosses have told them that you go, collaborate with somebody else, and they're trying to agree, but essentially what is happening is that they're looking for the very minuscule or non-existent intersection set between their rubrics. And transdisciplinary is a little bit like a game of soccer, where there are larger objectives of, not having as many goals scored against you as you score, but everybody's moving, and everybody has kind of specializations, but they can also take other positions. It's a very dynamic game, and there are goal-scoring moves that you generate. That is the kind of leadership that we need tomorrow, and the kind of leadership that's already being exhibited by the very avant-garde leaders today. So some of the principles is that we need to be transformation-minded. First of all, we need to think in terms of transformation. We need to figure out what is the nature of the transformation, so what is the direction. We need to think of scale. What is the scale? And be very aspirational about the scale. And then we need to ask in how much time, and say that what is the rate of this change that we want. And a simple way of thinking about it is that we have short-term and long-term goals, and typically short-term goals, when they're pitted against long-term goals, the short-term goals win out. But what if we have two lines? One of them is short-term and the opposite of short-term, long-term and the negative effects on long-term, and we cross them and we look for that sector. Okay. So with that, I'm going to end, and I guess I'm going to, if you want to announce the QA session at some other point, if you have the details for it. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Banny. Sorry, let me just...
Thank you.
expose myself to risk. The Q&A session will be hosted in the first coffee break, one flight of stair upwards with Professor Ronald Jones. So we're looking forward to that. We have a gift for you. We have an artist in residence here today. Her name is Anna-Lena Schiller. She's a German expressionist. And she has done a real-time work of art for you.
Wow.
And she up here to present it to you is Anna-Lena Schiller. She will get a warm round of applause as well.
Thank you very much. Wow,
and here it is.
This is fantastic.
It's wonderful.
I must say that after this and something else that happened, I think I'm completely unnecessary in this room, because right before this happened, I got handed a circular business card. This gent here has a circular business card. I don't know what I'm doing here talking about innovation. So it's fantastic. Thank you very much, and thank you so much. This is fantastic.
Thank you. And just while you pack that up, and while you're on the subject of self-promotion, here is my book. Thank you so much. It's called The Attack of the Unexpected. It's about the positive side of the unexpected. Anyway, thank you, Banny. See you later today.